The dusty trading post stood at the edge of Alta, Wyoming Territory, in the scorching summer of 1878, and Grace Reynolds wiped the sweat from her brow as she stacked canned goods on the weathered shelves, wondering if she would ever feel anything beyond the hollow ache that had settled in her chest since her husband died 2 years prior. The bell above the door jingled, and Grace turned to see a tall rancher stride through, his dark hair curling slightly at his collar, his green eyes surveying the dimly lit interior with an intensity that made her straighten her posture instinctively. She had seen him around town before, always keeping to himself, always maintaining a respectful distance from the widows and unmarried women who tried to catch his attention. "Afternoon, madam," he said, his voice deep and warm like honey poured over biscuits. "Name's Lucas Lawrence. I've got a ranch about 10 miles north of here, and I'm looking to set up a regular account for supplies." Grace wiped her hands on her apron and moved behind the counter, pulling out the leather-bound ledger where she kept track of accounts. "Grace Reynolds, I run this trading post. What kind of supplies are you needing, Mr. Lawrence? Please, call me Lucas." He approached the counter, and she caught the scent of leather and sage, clean and masculine. "I need feed for about 200 head of cattle, flour, sugar, coffee, beans, salt pork, and whatever fresh vegetables you might have coming in. I've got 6 hands working for me, and they eat like bears coming out of hibernation." Grace allowed herself a small smile, the first genuine one she had felt in weeks. "I can manage that. The freight wagon comes through every Wednesday and Saturday from Cheyenne. I can order whatever you need that I do not have in stock right now." Lucas pulled off his hat, revealing the full impact of his handsome features, though Grace tried not to notice the strong line of his jaw or the way his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled. "That would be mighty helpful, Mrs. Reynolds. I appreciate it." "It's just business," Grace said, perhaps too quickly. "I'll need half payment upfront for the first order until we establish your credit." "Fair enough." Lucas reached into his vest pocket and pulled out a leather wallet, counting out bills and placing them on the counter. As Grace reached for the money, their fingers brushed accidentally, and she pulled back as if burned, her heart hammering in her chest in a way it had not since before Thomas died. Lucas cleared his throat, looking uncomfortable. "I apologize, madam. I meant no disrespect. None taken." Grace busied herself with writing in the ledger, though her hand trembled slightly. "When would you like the first delivery?" "End of the week would be fine. I can send one of my hands with a wagon, or I can come myself." Grace looked up, meeting his eyes directly. "You can send whoever is convenient, Mr. Lawrence. I'm sure you have better things to do than collect supplies." "Lucas," he corrected gently. "And I don't mind making the trip. It gets lonely out on the ranch, and your trading post has a better selection than the general store in town. Plus, I hear you're fair with your prices." "I try to be." Grace closed the ledger and tucked the money into the cash box under the counter. "Is there anything else you need today?" Lucas glanced around the trading post, taking in the orderly shelves, the clean floor, the neat displays of goods. "You run this place all by yourself?" "I have help on delivery days," Grace said, her tone cooling. She had dealt with enough men who thought a woman could not manage business affairs without a man's guidance. "My husband built this trading post 6 years ago. When he passed, I took over. I've been doing just fine." "I didn't mean to imply otherwise," Lucas said quickly, holding up his hands. "I just meant it's impressive. This place is better organized than most establishments I've seen, and I've been from Texas to Montana." Grace softened slightly. "Thank you. I take pride in my work." "As you should." Lucas put his hat back on, tipping it politely. "I'll see you at the end of the week, Mrs. Reynolds, and thank you for your help." After he left, Grace found herself standing at the window, watching him mount a beautiful chestnut horse and ride down the main street of Alta. She shook her head, annoyed at herself for even looking. She had no business thinking about any man, least of all a rancher who probably just saw her as a convenient source of supplies. The week passed slowly, as weeks tended to do in the quiet trading post. Grace served her regular customers, placed orders with the freight company, and tried not to think about the tall rancher with the kind eyes. But on Friday afternoon, when the bell above the door chimed, her heart leaped before she even turned around. Lucas stood in the doorway, hat in hand, looking almost uncertain. "Afternoon, Grace. I hope you don't mind me coming a day early. I had to come into town for other business and I thought I'd check on the order." "It's all ready," Grace said, proud that her voice remained steady. "I've got everything packed and waiting in the back room. Your timing is good. The freight wagon came in this morning with fresh apples and potatoes." "Excellent." Lucas followed her to the back room, where she had organized his supplies into neat crates. "This looks perfect. My hands will be pleased to have fresh produce. We've been eating mostly dried goods and whatever game we can hunt." "Ranching is hard work," Grace said, checking items off her list. "My husband always said it took a special kind of stubbornness to make it in the cattle business." He was right about that. Lucas began carrying crates out to his wagon. "How long were you married, if you don't mind my asking?" "4 years." Grace picked up a smaller crate and carried it outside, ignoring Lucas's surprised look at her strength. "Thomas was a good man. He worked himself to death, literally. His heart just gave out one day while he was unloading freight. I'm sorry for your loss." Lucas set down the crate he was carrying and looked at her with genuine sympathy. "That must have been difficult. It was 2 years ago." Grace set down her own crate and wiped her hands. "I've learned to manage." "You do more than manage from what I can see." Lucas loaded another crate. "You thrive." Grace felt unexpected tears prick her eyes at the compliment and she turned away quickly. "I do what needs to be done." They finished loading the wagon in comfortable silence, and when the last crate was secured, Lucas pulled out his wallet again. "What do I owe you for this delivery?" Grace calculated quickly, then wrote out a receipt. "This covers the balance plus the new order. You've got credit now, so next time you can pay monthly if that's easier." "I appreciate that." Lucas tucked the receipt into his pocket, but he made no move to leave. "Grace, would you consider having dinner with me sometime? There's a decent restaurant over on 2nd Street and I'd like to repay your kindness." Grace's first instinct was to refuse, but something in his hopeful expression made her pause. "I don't know if that's a good idea." "Why not? We're both adults, we're both alone, and we both have to eat." Lucas smiled gently. "I'm not asking for anything improper, just a meal and conversation." "People will talk," Grace said, but her resolve was weakening. "People always talk. That's what people do in small towns." Lucas took a step closer, his voice dropping. "But I'd like to get to know you better, Grace Reynolds. You're intelligent, hardworking, and kind. Those are rare qualities." Grace felt her cheeks warm. "You don't know me well enough to make that judgment." "Then let me get to know you better. One dinner. If you hate it, I'll never ask again." Against her better judgment, Grace found herself nodding. "One dinner. But somewhere quiet where we won't be the main topic of gossip for the next month." Lucas's face lit up. "There's a small place at the edge of town, run by a Mexican family. Best food in the territory, and they mind their own business. How about tomorrow evening around 7? "Tomorrow evening," Grace agreed, already wondering if she had lost her mind. The next evening, Grace stood in front of her small mirror, trying to decide between her 2 good dresses. She had not cared about her appearance beyond basic neatness in so long that choosing what to wear felt strange and exciting. Finally, She settled on a deep blue dress that Thomas had always liked, then immediately felt guilty for thinking of her late husband while preparing for dinner with another man. "He would want you to be happy," she told her reflection firmly. "He told you not to spend your life grieving." Lucas arrived exactly at 7, driving a small buggy rather than the freight wagon. He wore a clean shirt and vest, his hair still damp from washing, and he held a small bouquet of wildflowers. "You look beautiful," he said simply, handing her the flowers. "Thank you." Grace took the flowers, touched by the gesture. "Let me put these in water." The restaurant was indeed small and quiet, tucked away from the main street in an adobe building with a covered porch. The owner, a woman named Maria, greeted Lucas with warm familiarity and showed them to a corner table away from the few other diners. "You come here often?" Grace asked as they settled into their seats. "Once a week or so when I come to town," Lucas admitted. "Maria reminds me of my mother. She's always trying to feed me more than any human could possibly eat." Grace laughed, surprised at how natural it felt. "Tell me about your mother." Over plates of enchiladas and fresh tortillas, Lucas told her about growing up in Texas, the youngest of 5 children. His father had been a rancher who taught all his children the business, including his 2 daughters. His mother had been the daughter of Mexican landowners who lost their property after the war with Mexico, and she had brought grace and culture to the rough ranch life. "They both died of fever about 5 years ago," Lucas said, his voice quiet with old grief. "That's when I decided to move north and start fresh. Too many memories in Texas. And your siblings, scattered. My oldest brother runs the family ranch. My sisters married and moved to California. My other brother became a lawyer in San Antonio." Lucas took a sip of his coffee. "We write occasionally, but we're not close anymore. Life took us in different directions." Grace shared her own story about growing up in Ohio as the daughter of a shopkeeper, meeting Thomas when he came through town as a freight hauler, following him west with dreams of adventure and prosperity. The trading post had been his dream, and she had made it her own after his death. "Do you ever think about going back east?" Lucas asked. "Never," Grace said firmly. "This is my home now. I've built something here, something that's mine. I'm not going to abandon it." "Good," Lucas said, and the approval in his voice warmed her. "The West needs more women like you, women with backbone and determination." As they walked back to her small house behind the trading post, the night air cool and filled with the scent of sage, Grace felt more alive than she had in years. Lucas kept a respectful distance, not trying to hold her hand or press too close, but his presence beside her felt solid and comforting. "Thank you for tonight," Grace said when they reached her door. "I enjoyed it more than I expected to." "So did I." Lucas hesitated, then said, "Grace, I know you've got no reason to trust my intentions, and I know you've got a business to run and a life you've built. But I'd like to see you again. Not just for business, but for this, for conversation and company." Grace looked up at him, seeing sincerity in his green eyes. "I'd like that too, but I need to take things slowly, Lucas. I'm not ready for anything rushed or complicated." "Slow is fine by me," Lucas assured her. "We can go as slow as you need. I'm not going anywhere." Over the next several weeks, Lucas found reasons to come to town more frequently. Sometimes he needed supplies. Sometimes he claimed to have business with the bank or the land office, but Grace suspected he was making excuses. They fell into a comfortable routine of dinners at Maria's restaurant, walks along the creek that ran behind the trading post, and long conversations about everything and nothing. Grace learned that Lucas loved books, especially poetry, though he was embarrassed to admit it at first. He had a small library at his ranch, books he had collected over years of traveling. She learned that he was fair with his ranch hands, paying them well and treating them with respect. She learned that he had a quiet sense of humor and a deep well of patience. Lucas learned that Grace had a head for numbers that would put most bankers to shame. She could calculate profit margins and inventory needs in her head faster than he could write them down. He learned that she loved thunderstorms and hated the hot winds that blew dust through every crack in the trading post. He learned that she sang when she worked alone, old hymns her mother had taught her. One evening in late August, as they sat on the porch of the trading post watching the sun set over the mountains, Lucas took her hand gently. Grace stiffened slightly but did not pull away. "Grace, I need to tell you something," Lucas said, his voice serious. "I'm falling in love with you. I've been fighting it because I didn't want to rush you or make you uncomfortable, but I can't keep it inside anymore. You're in my thoughts from the moment I wake up until I fall asleep at night. I want to build a future with you if you'll have me." Grace's heart pounded in her chest. Part of her wanted to pull away, to retreat behind the safe walls she had built around her heart. But another part, a braver part, wanted to lean into the warmth and strength Lucas offered. "I'm frightened," she admitted quietly. "I lost Thomas and it nearly destroyed me." "What if I let myself love you and lose you too?" "You might," Lucas said honestly, tightening his grip on her hand. "That's the risk of loving anyone. But Grace, what kind of life is it if you're too scared to take that risk? You're already living half a life, existing but not really living." "Don't you want more than that?" Grace felt tears slide down her cheeks. "I don't know if I can do it again, the loving and the losing." "You can," Lucas said gently, reaching up to brush the tears away with his thumb. "You're the strongest woman I've ever met. You can do anything you set your mind to. What if I'm not ready? Then I'll wait." Lucas brought her hand to his lips and kissed it softly. "I'll wait as long as it takes, Grace. You're worth waiting for." That night, lying alone in her bed, Grace thought about everything Lucas had said. She thought about Thomas and the love they had shared, brief but real. She thought about the 2 years she had spent in a gray fog of grief and survival. And she thought about the way her heart had started to wake up again, like spring flowers pushing through late snow, whenever Lucas was near. In the morning, she made her decision. When Lucas came by the trading post later that day for his regular supply order, Grace met him at the door. Without saying a word, she reached up and kissed him, a soft, tentative kiss that nevertheless conveyed everything she could not yet put into words. Lucas pulled back, his eyes searching her face. "Grace, I'm still frightened," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "But I'm tired of being afraid. I'm tired of just existing. I want to live again, Lucas. With you." Lucas pulled her close, holding her as if she were precious and fragile. "You won't regret this, Grace. I promise you that." "Don't make promises you can't keep," Grace said, but she was smiling as she said it. "Just promise you'll be patient with me while I figure out how to do this." "That I can promise." Their relationship deepened through the fall, though Grace insisted on maintaining propriety. Lucas respected her wishes, never pushing for more than she was ready to give. He courted her properly, bringing her small gifts, taking her on picnics when the weather allowed, introducing her to his ranch hands who treated her with friendly respect. Grace visited his ranch for the first time in October, riding out in the buggy with Lucas on a crisp autumn morning. The ranch was larger than she had expected, with a sturdy house, a big barn, several outbuildings, and miles of fenced pasture where cattle grazed peacefully. "This is impressive," Grace said as Lucas helped her down from the buggy. "You've built something substantial here." "It's taken years of hard work," Lucas admitted. "But it's starting to pay off. The cattle market is good right now, and I've been able to expand the herd. In another few years, this will be one of the most profitable ranches in the territory." Grace walked around the property, taking in the neat fences, the well-maintained buildings, the organized corrals. She could see Lucas's influence everywhere, the same attention to detail and order that she valued in her own work. "You could do a lot more if you had a partner," she said thoughtfully. "Someone to manage the business side while you handle the livestock and the land." Lucas looked at her hopefully. "Are you applying for the position?" Grace laughed. "I'm just making an observation, but it's true. You're spread thin trying to do everything yourself. A good partner could help you expand even faster." "Is that a yes?" Grace turned to face him, suddenly serious. "Lucas, are you asking me to marry you?" Lucas took off his hat, running his hand through his hair nervously. "I'm doing this all wrong. I should have planned something romantic, maybe waited for a better moment. Or you could just answer the question," Grace said, her heart racing. "Yes," Lucas said, meeting her eyes directly. "I'm asking you to marry me, Grace Reynolds. I'm asking you to be my wife, my partner, my companion for whatever years God grants us. I'm asking you to help me build this ranch into something we can be proud of, to share the work and the rewards. I'm asking you to let me love you for the rest of my life." Grace felt tears threatening again, but these were different tears than the ones she had cried over Thomas's grave. These were tears of joy and hope and new beginnings. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Lucas pulled her into his arms and kissed her properly for the first time, a deep, passionate kiss that made her knees weak and her heart sore. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Grace laughed breathlessly. "We should probably go inside before your ranch hands see us carrying on like teenagers," she said. "Let them see," Lucas said, grinning. "I want the whole world to know you're going to be my wife." They were married in November in a simple ceremony at the small church in Alta. Maria and her family attended, along with several of Grace's regular customers and Lucas's ranch hands. Grace wore a new dress in deep green, and Lucas wore his best suit. The preacher kept the ceremony short and meaningful, and when Lucas kissed his bride, everyone cheered. The reception was held at Maria's restaurant, where tables had been pushed together and covered with food. Grace found herself surrounded by well-wishers, many of whom admitted they had been hoping she would find happiness again. "Your Thomas was a good man," old Mrs. Whitman told her, patting her hand. "But he would want you to live, not just survive. This Lucas seems like a fine choice." "He is," Grace agreed, watching her new husband laugh with the ranch hands across the room. "He really is." That night, as they prepared to leave for the ranch where Grace would now make her home, she felt a moment of panic. Everything was changing so fast. The trading post, her independence, her carefully ordered life, all of it was being transformed into something new and unknown. Lucas must have sensed her hesitation because he took her hand gently. "Grace, we don't have to change everything at once. We can figure this out together one day at a time. If you want to keep running the trading post, we'll make that work. If you want to focus on the ranch, we can hire someone to manage the post. Whatever you need, we'll figure it out." Grace squeezed his hand, grateful for his understanding. "I want to keep the trading post. It's my connection to Thomas, to the life we built together. But I want to be your wife too, to build this new life with you. We'll have to find a balance." "Then that's what we'll do," Lucas assured her. The first months of marriage were an adjustment for both of them. Grace kept running the trading post, hiring a young man named Peter to help with the heavy work and deliveries. She spent 3 days a week in town and 4 days at the ranch, learning the rhythms of ranch life and the business of cattle. Lucas was patient with her learning curve, teaching her about breeding stock and grazing patterns and market prices. But it was the private moments that Grace treasured most. The quiet evenings when they sat together reading by lamplight. The mornings when she woke to find Lucas already up, bringing her coffee in bed. The nights when they came together with passion and tenderness, learning each other's bodies and hearts with equal attention. "I never thought I could be this happy again," Grace admitted one night as they lay tangled together in the darkness. "After Thomas died, I thought that part of my life was over." "It was over," Lucas said, stroking her hair gently. "That chapter ended and a new one began." "That doesn't mean you loved Thomas any less, or that what you had with him wasn't real and important. It just means you were brave enough to turn the page and keep reading." Grace kissed him, pouring all her love and gratitude into the gesture. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I think I'm the lucky one," Lucas said, pulling her closer. "I spent years moving from place to place, never finding anywhere that felt like home. Then I met you, and suddenly I understood what I'd been missing." As winter settled over Wyoming, bringing snow and bitter cold, Grace and Lucas worked together to prepare the ranch for the harsh months ahead. The cattle were brought closer to the ranch buildings, where they could be fed more easily. Supplies were laid in, enough to last through even the worst blizzards. The trading post did brisk business as other ranchers and townspeople prepared for winter as well. On Christmas Eve, Lucas surprised Grace with a gift, a beautiful leather-bound journal with her initials tooled into the cover. "I thought you might like to keep records of the ranch," he explained. "Business records, but also personal things. Your thoughts and observations. Maybe someday our children or grandchildren will read it and know what life was like for us." Grace ran her fingers over the smooth leather, touched by his thoughtfulness. "Children, we haven't talked about that." Lucas looked suddenly uncertain. "I assumed, but I shouldn't have. Do you want children, Grace?" "I do," Grace said softly. "I always thought I would have them with Thomas, but it never happened. I'm 30 years old, Lucas. I may not be able to have children." "Then we'll be happy together, just the two of us," Lucas said firmly. "I want children if we're blessed with them, but I want you more. You're enough, Grace. You'll always be enough." Grace blinked back tears and kissed him. "I love you so much. How did I not see that sooner?" "You needed time to heal," Lucas said. "We both did." Spring came late to Wyoming that year, but when it finally arrived, it brought new life in more ways than one. Grace discovered she was pregnant in early April, and the joy on Lucas's face when she told him was something she would treasure forever. "A baby," he said wonderingly, placing his hand gently on her still flat stomach. "We're going to have a baby. Are you happy?" Grace asked, though she could see the answer in his eyes. "Happy doesn't begin to cover it," Lucas said, pulling her into a careful embrace. "You've given me everything, Grace. A home, a purpose, love, and now this. I don't know what I did to deserve all of it." "You were patient," Grace said. "You waited for me to be ready, and you loved me even when I was difficult and scared. That's what you did to deserve it." The pregnancy was not easy. Grace had morning sickness that lasted well into the afternoon, and the Wyoming heat of summer made her uncomfortable and irritable. But Lucas was attentive and caring, taking over more of the physical work at both the ranch and the trading post, insisting that she rest more and worry less. "The business will survive if you take a few hours off," he told her when she fretted about leaving Peter in charge of the trading post for a full week. "The baby is more important than profits." "The baby will need those profits," Grace argued, but she agreed to rest more. In late October, on a cool evening with the first hint of winter in the air, Grace went into labor. The midwife, a capable woman named Sarah who lived in Alta, arrived quickly and took charge of the situation with calm efficiency. Lucas paced outside the bedroom for hours, wearing a path in the floor until finally, near dawn, he heard the unmistakable cry of a newborn baby. Sarah emerged from the bedroom, smiling. "You have a son, Mr. Lawrence. A big, healthy boy. And your wife did beautifully." Lucas rushed into the bedroom to find Grace propped up against the pillows, exhausted but glowing, holding a small bundle wrapped in a blue blanket. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son for the first time. "He's perfect," Lucas whispered, touching the baby's tiny hand with one finger. The baby's fingers closed around his, gripping with surprising strength. "He looks like you," Grace said, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. "Same dark hair, same stubborn chin." "Poor kid," Lucas joked, but his eyes were wet with tears. "What should we name him?" "I was thinking Thomas," Grace said quietly, "if that's all right with you, to honor the man who made it possible for us to meet." Lucas looked at her with such love that Grace felt her heart might burst. "Thomas Lawrence. I think that's perfect." The first years of young Thomas's life were busy and full. Grace managed to balance motherhood with running the trading post, though she relied more heavily on Peter's help and eventually trained another assistant as well. Lucas expanded the ranch, buying more land and increasing the herd. Money was tight sometimes, but they were building something lasting, something they could be proud of. When Thomas was 2 years old, Grace discovered she was pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was easier, and she gave birth to a daughter in the spring. They named her Sarah, after the midwife who had helped bring both their children into the world. "Now we have one of each," Lucas said, holding his tiny daughter with the same wonder he had shown with Thomas. "Our family is complete, is it?" Grace asked, exhausted but happy. "What if I want more?" "Then we'll have more," Lucas said, grinning. "I'll take as many babies as you want to give me. Each one is a blessing, but 2 prove to be enough." Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the animals. Sarah was more like her mother, curious and determined, wanting to know how everything worked. Grace taught her to read and do sums by the time she was 4, and Sarah would sit in the trading post for hours, watching her mother conduct business and asking endless questions. Life settled into a comfortable rhythm. The ranch prospered under Lucas's careful management, and the trading post remained the most successful business in Alta. Grace and Lucas's marriage deepened with time, growing stronger through shared challenges and joys. They argued sometimes, both being strong-willed people, but they always talked things through and found compromises. One evening, when Thomas was 7 and Sarah was 5, Grace found Lucas sitting on the porch watching the sunset. She settled beside him, leaning against his shoulder. "Happy?" she asked. "Incredibly," Lucas said, putting his arm around her. "Sometimes I have to pinch myself to make sure this is all real. The beautiful wife, the healthy children, the successful ranch. It's more than I ever dreamed of having." "I feel the same way," Grace admitted. "There are days I still can't believe how much my life has changed. From that lonely widow running a trading post to this, a full, rich life surrounded by love." "You were never just a lonely widow," Lucas said, kissing the top of her head. "You were always strong and capable and worthy of love. You just needed time to remember that." As the years passed, Alta grew from a small frontier town into a thriving community. The railroad came through in 1885, bringing more commerce and more people. Grace's trading post expanded into a larger general store, and she hired several employees to help manage the increased business. Lucas became one of the most respected ranchers in the territory, known for his fair dealing and quality cattle. Thomas grew into a capable young man who loved ranching as much as his father did. He spent every spare moment working alongside Lucas, learning everything about the business. Sarah, true to her independent nature, announced at 15 that she wanted to go to college back east to study business. "Absolutely not," Lucas said when she first brought it up over dinner. "You're too young, and it's too dangerous for a young woman to travel alone." "I won't be alone," Sarah argued. "There are schools specifically for women with chaperones and supervision. And I'm not going to be content just running a store or managing a ranch. I want to learn about finance and economics and modern business practices." Grace watched the argument with interest, remembering her own youthful determination. "Let her go, Lucas. She's like me. She needs to spread her wings and see what she's capable of." "You're taking her side?" Lucas asked incredulously. "I'm taking the side of a smart, capable young woman who knows what she wants," Grace said calmly. "We raised her to be independent and ambitious. We can't be surprised when she actually is." Lucas looked between his wife and daughter, both wearing identical expressions of stubborn determination, and sighed. "I'm outnumbered. But Sarah, you have to promise to write every week and come home for the summers." Sarah launched herself at her father, hugging him tightly. "I promise, Papa. Thank you for understanding." After Sarah left for college in the fall, the house felt emptier, though Thomas more than made up for his sister's absence with his energy and constant questions about ranch management. At 20, he was already thinking about the future, about expanding operations and modernizing practices. "I've been reading about scientific breeding," he told Lucas one evening. "If we're selective about which bulls we use and keep better records of bloodlines, we could improve the quality of our herd significantly." "That costs money," Lucas pointed out. "Good breeding stock doesn't come cheap." "But it would pay off in the long run," Thomas argued. "Higher quality cattle bring better prices at market. We could charge premium rates." Grace listened to them debate, proud of her son's ambition and intelligence. He had the best qualities of both his parents, Lucas's patience and practical wisdom combined with her head for business and numbers. "Let him try it," she suggested. "Start with a small investment and see how it works. If Thomas is right, we'll expand. If he's wrong, we'll have learned a valuable lesson without risking too much." Lucas considered, then nodded. "All right. You've got 1 year to prove this scientific breeding works, Thomas. If the results are good, we'll invest more heavily." Thomas's innovations proved successful, and within 3 years, the Lawrence Ranch was producing some of the finest cattle in Wyoming. Other ranchers came to study their methods and buy breeding stock. The Trading Post, now renamed Reynolds General Store in honor of Grace's maiden name and her first husband, continued to thrive as well. Sarah returned from college with a degree in business and revolutionary ideas about modern merchandising and accounting practices. She took over much of the day-to-day management of the store, implementing new systems that increased efficiency and profits. Grace found herself with more time to spend at the ranch, working alongside Lucas as they had always planned. "We make a good team," Lucas said one afternoon as they rode out to check on the cattle. At 55, he still sat a horse as well as he had at 30, though his hair was now more gray than dark. "We always have," Grace agreed. She was 52 now, her own hair threaded with silver, but she felt younger than she had at 30. Love and purpose had kept her vital and energetic. That evening, sitting on the porch as they had done countless times over the years, Lucas took Grace's hand. "I have something I want to tell you." Grace heard the seriousness in his tone and turned to face him. "What is it?" "I've been thinking about the future. Thomas is perfectly capable of running the ranch now, and Sarah has the store well in hand. We've built something lasting, something we can be proud of. But I want to spend more time with you, Grace. I want to travel, see some of the places we've always talked about visiting. I want to enjoy the fruits of all our hard work together." Grace felt a flutter of excitement in her chest. "Where would we go?" "Anywhere you want," Lucas said, squeezing her hand. "San Francisco, Denver, maybe even back east to visit Sarah's college. I want to show you the world, or at least the parts of it we can reach by train and stagecoach." "That sounds wonderful," Grace said, smiling. "But not until after the spring cattle drive. We need to make sure Thomas is truly ready to handle everything on his own." "Deal," Lucas said, pulling her close. "And Grace?" "Yes, thank you for saying yes all those years ago. Thank you for taking a chance on a lonely rancher who walked into your trading post looking for supplies and found his heart's home instead." Grace kissed him, a soft, sweet kiss that still held the passion and promise of their early days. "Thank you for being patient enough to wait for me. Thank you for loving me back to life." They made their first trip that summer, traveling by train to San Francisco. Grace marveled at the ocean, having never seen anything larger than the rivers and lakes of Wyoming. They stayed in a fine hotel, ate at elegant restaurants, and walked along the beach at sunset. Lucas bought her a beautiful shawl made of Chinese silk, and Grace bought him a pocket watch engraved with their wedding date. "I could get used to this," Grace admitted as they sat in their hotel room overlooking the bay. "But I miss the ranch. I miss the wide open spaces and the quiet." "Me too," Lucas agreed. "But it's good to see new places and have adventures together. We've earned it." They returned home in late summer to find that Thomas and Sarah had managed everything perfectly in their absence. The ranch was running smoothly, the store was profitable, and both children seemed to have grown even more capable in the few months their parents had been gone. "I think they're ready for us to retire completely," Lucas joked to Grace later. "They barely needed us before, and now they definitely don't." "They'll always need us," Grace said. "Just not in the same way. Now we get to be the wise advisors instead of the ones doing all the work." But retirement didn't suit either of them for long. Within a few months, both Grace and Lucas found themselves back at work, unable to completely let go of the businesses they had built. They compromised, working fewer hours and taking more trips, finding a balance between staying involved and letting their children take the lead. When Thomas married a local girl named Margaret, Grace helped plan the wedding with the same attention to detail she brought to everything. The ceremony was held at the ranch, with half the territory in attendance. Watching her son exchange vows with his bride, Grace felt the circle of life turning, one generation passing the torch to the next. "Feeling old," Lucas whispered to her during the reception. "Feeling grateful," Grace whispered back. "For all of it. The good years and the hard ones, the love and the loss and the new beginnings. All of it brought us here." Sarah married a few years later, choosing a fellow she met at college, a young lawyer named Michael who had the good sense to be impressed by his wife's business acumen rather than threatened by it. They settled in Cheyenne, where Michael set up his practice and Sarah opened a consulting business helping other stores modernize their operations. "She gets her ambition from you," Lucas told Grace as they waved goodbye after Sarah's wedding. "She gets her stubbornness from you," Grace countered, laughing. Thomas and Margaret gave them 4 grandchildren over the next several years. 2 boys and 2 girls who filled the ranch house with noise and laughter. Grace loved being a grandmother, spoiling the children in ways she had been too busy to spoil her own. She taught them to read and count, told them stories about the old days when Alta was just a small trading post, and the territory was still wild and new. Lucas taught the grandchildren to ride and rope, patient with their mistakes and generous with his praise. He built them a tree house in the big cottonwood near the creek and took them fishing on lazy summer afternoons. Watching him with the grandchildren, Grace fell in love with him all over again, seeing the same kindness and patience that had first drawn her to him decades earlier. One evening, as they sat on the porch watching the sunset, now in their late 60s, Lucas turned to Grace with a thoughtful expression. "You ever think about that first day I walked into your trading post?" he asked. "Sometimes," Grace admitted. "I remember thinking you were too handsome for your own good and wondering what you really wanted." Lucas laughed. "I wanted supplies, and then I saw you, all stern and businesslike, and I wanted to know what it would take to make you smile. Turns out it took months of patient courting and more stubbornness than I knew I had." "You were very persistent," Grace agreed, "but in the best way. You never pushed, never demanded. You just kept showing up and being kind and decent until I couldn't imagine my life without you." "That was the plan," Lucas said, grinning. "Though I have to admit there were times I wondered if you'd ever say yes to anything more than a business arrangement." Grace reached for his hand, lacing their fingers together as naturally as breathing. "I'm glad I did. I'm glad I was brave enough to take that chance to open my heart again after Thomas. You've given me a life beyond anything I dreamed possible." "We gave each other that life," Lucas corrected. "Partnership, remember, that's what we've always been, equal partners in everything." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple, Grace reflected on the journey that had brought them to this moment. From that first meeting in the trading post to this peaceful evening surrounded by family and prosperity, every step had been worth taking. The trading post where it all began was now Reynolds' General Store, managed by Sarah during her visits home and run day to day by Peter, who had proven himself capable and trustworthy over decades of service. The ranch had grown from Lucas's modest operation into one of the most successful in the state, now managed primarily by Thomas with help from his oldest son, who showed all the signs of being another capable rancher. Grace and Lucas spent their later years exactly as they wanted, splitting time between the ranch and occasional travels, spoiling their grandchildren, and enjoying the fruits of their long partnership. They attended church socials and town meetings, hosted family gatherings and holiday celebrations, and remained active parts of the Alta community they had helped build. On their 30th wedding anniversary, the town threw them a celebration in the church hall. Nearly everyone in Alta attended, testimony to the respect and affection the community held for them both. Speech after speech praised their generosity, their fairness in business, their contributions to the town's growth. "I never expected this," Grace whispered to Lucas as yet another person stood to toast them. "You deserve it," Lucas said firmly. "You've touched countless lives, Grace. The trading post provided goods and credit to people when they needed it most. You've employed dozens of people over the years, treated everyone fairly regardless of their background or circumstances. This community loves you because you've loved it right back." When it was Lucas's turn to speak, he stood and looked out at the gathered crowd. 30 years ago, I was a lonely rancher who walked into a trading post looking for supplies. What I found was so much more. I found a partner, a companion, a love that has enriched every day of my life since. Grace Reynolds Lawrence, you have made me the luckiest man in Wyoming. Here's to 30 more years, God willing, and to the adventure we're still living together." The crowd erupted in applause, and Grace felt tears streaming down her face as Lucas pulled her to her feet and kissed her in front of everyone. After all these years, he could still make her heart race and her knees weak. They didn't get 30 more years, but they got 15 good ones. Lucas remained healthy and active well into his 80s, still riding out to check on the cattle, still offering advice to Thomas and his grandsons. Grace continued to keep the books for both the ranch and the store, her mind sharp even as her body began to slow down. They celebrated their 45th anniversary quietly, just the two of them and their immediate family, at the ranch house where they had raised their children and built their life together. As Grace looked around the table at her children, grandchildren, and even a few great-grandchildren, she marveled at the legacy they had created, not just in property and business success, but in the family they had raised and the love they had shared. "What are you thinking?" Lucas asked her later as they sat alone in the parlor. "I'm thinking about second chances," Grace said softly. "I'm thinking about how I almost let fear keep me from this, from you, from all of this. I'm thinking about how grateful I am that you were patient enough to wait for me to find my courage." "I would have waited forever," Lucas said simply. "You were worth any amount of waiting." Grace moved to sit beside him, resting her head on his shoulder as she had done thousands of times over their decades together. "I love you, Lucas Lawrence. I loved you when you first walked into my trading post, even though I didn't admit it for months. I loved you when you courted me with wildflowers and patience. I loved you when you said your vows and promised me forever. And I love you now more than ever because we've built that forever together." "And I love you, Grace," Lucas said, holding her close. "My beautiful, stubborn, brilliant wife. You've given me everything that matters. Purpose, family, love, and a life well lived. What more could any man ask for?" They sat in comfortable silence, watching the fire burn low, knowing without speaking that these quiet moments together were precious and numbered. But neither feared what lay ahead. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and built something lasting. Whatever came next, they would face it as they had faced everything else together. Lucas passed peacefully in his sleep 2 years later at the age of 86. Grace held his hand through his final hours, talking to him about their life together, thanking him for every day, every moment, every memory. When he took his last breath, she kissed his forehead and whispered, "Until we meet again, my love." The funeral was one of the largest Alta had ever seen. People came from across the state to pay their respects to the rancher who had been known for his fairness, his kindness, and his deep love for his family. Grace sat through it all with dry eyes, her grief too deep for public tears. She saved those for later, for the private moments when she could mourn the loss of her partner, her love, her other half. But Grace didn't let grief consume her as it had after Thomas's death. She had learned that lesson long ago. Instead, she poured her energy into her family, spending time with her great-grandchildren, advising Sarah on business matters, helping Thomas with ranch decisions. She kept Lucas alive through stories, teaching the younger generations about the man he had been and the values he had lived by. On what would have been their 48th anniversary, Grace rode out to Lucas's favorite spot on the ranch, a high point where you could see for miles in every direction. She sat in the grass, feeling the Wyoming wind on her face, and talked to him as if he were sitting beside her. "I miss you every day," she said quietly. "But I'm not afraid anymore, Lucas. You taught me that. You taught me to be brave enough to love, to risk, to live fully even knowing that loss is inevitable. Thank you for that. Thank you for everything." As if in answer, a hawk circled overhead, riding the wind currents with grace and power. Grace watched it soar, feeling at peace for the first time since Lucas's death. He would want her to keep living, to keep finding joy and purpose. She could do that. She would do that, in honor of the love they had shared and the life they had built together. Grace lived 3 more years, remaining sharp and active until the very end. She passed away quietly in her sleep at the age of 89, surrounded by her family in the ranch house where she had spent the happiest years of her life. Her last words, spoken to Sarah who sat holding her hand, were, "Tell everyone I said goodbye, and tell them I'm going to find Lucas now." They buried her beside Lucas on the ranch, under the cottonwood tree where they had carved their initials decades earlier. The headstone was simple but elegant, reading, "Grace Reynolds Lawrence, beloved wife, mother, grandmother, She lived fully and loved deeply. Beside it, Lucas's stone bore a similar epitaph. The ranch remained in the Lawrence family, passed down through the generations, each one adding to the legacy Lucas and Grace had begun. Reynolds General Store continued to operate in Alta, a reminder of Grace's first business and the trading post where it all began. And the story of the widow who ran the trading post and the rancher who traded his heart for hers became part of Alta's history, told and retold as an example of love, courage, and the power of second chances. Years later, when Sarah's great-granddaughter asked about the portraits that hung in the ranch house, showing a stern-looking woman and a handsome man with kind eyes, she was told the story about how Lucas had walked into Grace's trading post one hot summer day in 1878, looking for supplies and finding so much more. About how Grace had been afraid to love again, but found the courage to take a chance. About how they had built a life together based on respect, partnership, and a love that had only grown stronger with time. Did they really love each other that much? The little girl asked, studying the portraits with wide eyes. They really did, Sarah said, now an old woman herself but still sharp and clever as ever. My father used to say that watching his parents together was like watching two halves of the same whole. They were partners in everything, and they loved each other until their very last breaths. That's the kind of love worth waiting for, worth fighting for, worth building a life around. The little girl nodded solemnly, already dreaming of finding such love herself someday. And in that way, Lucas and Grace's legacy continued, not just in the land and businesses they had built, but in the example they had set of what true love and partnership could be. The trading post where it all began had long since been replaced by a modern building, but old-timers in Alta still remembered the original structure, and the widow who had run it with such capability and grace. They remembered how Lucas Lawrence had courted her patiently and persistently, never giving up even when it seemed she might never open her heart again. They remembered the wedding and the years that followed, the way Lucas and Grace had worked side by side to build something lasting and important. And they told the story to their children and grandchildren, keeping alive the memory of a love that had transformed two lonely people into something greater than either could have been alone. A love that had started with a simple transaction in a trading post and grown into a legacy that would endure for generations. That was the true measure of Lucas and Grace's life together, not the land they had accumulated or the businesses they had built, but the love they had shared and the example they had set. They had shown that it was never too late for new beginnings, that courage and patience could overcome any obstacle, and that true partnership meant building something together that was greater than the sum of its parts. In the end, that trading post in Alta, Wyoming Territory, had been the starting point for something extraordinary. Not just a successful business or a prosperous ranch, but a love story for the ages. The kind of story that reminded people that second chances were possible, that love could heal even the deepest wounds, and that sometimes the best things in life came when you were brave enough to open your heart again. Lucas had walked into that trading post as a lonely rancher looking for supplies. He had walked out having found his future, though it would take months of patient courtship before Grace was ready to see it. But patience had been rewarded, courage had been found, and love had triumphed over fear and grief. That was their story, the widow and the rancher, and it was a story worth telling. A story of the Wild West, yes, but more importantly, a story of two hearts finding each other against all odds and building a life together that stood the test of time. A story that proved that the greatest adventures were not found in distant lands or dangerous pursuits, but in the simple act of opening your heart to love and letting another person in. Grace and Lucas had taken that risk, made that choice, and spent nearly half a century proving that it had been the right one. Their love had been tested by hardship and loss, strengthened by partnership and shared purpose, and deepened by time and commitment. It was the kind of love that left a mark on everyone who witnessed it, inspiring others to be brave enough to seek the same. And so the story lived on, told around dinner tables and passed down through generations, a reminder that love was worth the risk, that second chances were real, and that sometimes the person you needed most walked through your door when you least expected it. That was the legacy of Grace Reynolds Lawrence and Lucas Lawrence, the widow who ran the trading post and the rancher who traded his heart for hers, and it was a legacy that would never fade.